Right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this, what is the second talk in a symposium organized by the Economics Network. As you've just heard, this session is being recorded, and the recording would be made available on the Economics website, Economics Network website later. If anyone would not like to be part of the recording, if you could let Ashley know in the chat, she will be able to remove your participation from the recording, I think. I will just share my screen very briefly, and I hope you can see it. So just providing some context for the talk today. This is the second of 5 planned talks in this online symposium, which is organized by the Economics Network. The first talk was last February about assessment in the digital world. It was an initial talk. And then today we obviously got to cover the ethical use of generative AI. And we've got 3 other talks planned for the future. Hopefully it won't take as long. It won't take 11 months to organize the next session, but we will keep you definitely on board. So the talk, the subject today is ethical use of generative AI. We've got 3 fantastic speakers for you today. We're going to start with Caitlin Bentley. She's a senior lecturer in AI education at King's College London. She's going to talk to us in general about responsible use of AI in higher education. She's not I joked earlier that she's not an economist, but technically she did a minor in economics years ago, so she's an honorary economist as well. We then want to be followed by Stephen Proud, who's going to be talking to us about the ethical use of AI, specifically in education, economics education research. Stephen is a reader in economics from Bristol University. He's also a member of the executive group of the Economics Network, and also an editor of the IRE, the International Review of Economics Education. So he's going to talk to us about that. Edwin Ip is a senior lecturer at Exeter University. He's going to be talking about a general talk about the use of technology in and how that is changing hiring practices in companies. So the subject in the slide is a bit misleading, but basically that's how it is. In terms of housekeeping rules, just if you've got any questions, please try and use the chat. Ashley from the Economics Network is going to keep an eye on the chat for us. At the end of each talk, we will allow 1 or 2 questions, so that people can ask questions immediately. And then at the end, hopefully, we can all have a more general Q&A session with everyone asking the questions that they might want to have. Okay, so that's basically everything that I wanted to say. So unless anybody's got any pressing question, I will pass the session immediately to Caitlin so she can give us the talk that she has planned for us today. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And Caitlin, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me here. And I have to say that both of my parents are economics professors. So I feel like, I may be an economist through osmosis, but they are like resource economists and social economists. So bucking against the norm, you'll probably see, some of their values kind of shining through in my presentation as well. So I'm here to talk today about a responsible AI vision for higher education, and I'm just going to share my screen. Yes. Okay, that works. So as Carlos mentioned, I'm a senior lecturer in AI education in the Department of Informatics at King's College London, and I'm also a part of a large consortium called Responsible AI UK. I'm involved in the skills pillar primarily, but it's a large research program, and we invite anyone to sign up for our mailing list. There I can share the details in the chat later, but we do invite economists to get involved in some of these discussions as well. All right, so click. So since the big excitement that emerged, due to the release of ChatGPT a couple years ago now, I think, we've all been privy to the hype surrounding it. And just doing a short search on Google about AI in higher education, we tend to see quite positive images or portrayals of what AI will do for higher education. There is kind of one maybe more balanced view, a little infographic that comes up. But subconsciously, we're being told that AI is good. It's going to be beneficial. It's going to change the world. And I'm sure as you, especially if you're an academic working in the UK, it has, certainly there, I'm sure you have personally experienced some benefits, but working as a lecturer teaching is created certainly a lot more headaches as well. But I want to talk about the broader context in addition to higher education, why we need to care about it in higher education. And really what I want to speak with you today about, questioning this wave of AI and what we can do or how we need to act to really take control over how it is affecting knowledge production, education, innovation, all these things that we care about. So of course, we're being told there's lots of benefits. We can use it for lots of interesting things like generative AI, but there are definitely a lot of costs that have come both in the production of these large language models, in addition to the various other kinds of AI, as well as a host of ethics, equity, sustainability issues. And I didn't want to go into too much detail about this. We have a 2-week course at King's College London that's hosted on FutureLearn. So you can sign up for free for 2 weeks, the 2 weeks that it takes. And you can take in more detail what AI is, as well as our section on ethics, access, and sustainability, in which there's a couple of videos where I talk a bit more about the specific issues, but there are a range of issues outside of higher education. Some of the ones we don't often discuss regard the human labor implications in terms of how a lot of these models have been trained from a technical standpoint. They use something called microtasking, which I'm sure probably a lot of economists study actually. So you probably know more about this than I do, but this can lead to unfair and harmful working conditions, in addition to the massive amounts of carbon emissions that are increasingly being spewed out. I'm sure we've all heard about bias, the inbuilt gender inequality, racial, religious, geographical imbalances that are inbuilt into these models, because large language models in particular are trained using data from the internet, of which is mostly composed of about 10 languages, according to a website called Whose Knowledge. But of course, they also say that there are 7,000 languages in the whole world. And if if the internet is just dominated by 10 languages with US English dominating that bunch, then we are really homogenizing the way that knowledge is represented as well as culture. Another thing that we have to be concerned about, especially when we're using these tools with our own IP or encouraging our students to use them, regards privacy. And then I definitely wanted to just touch upon, I think two of the other speakers are focusing more on the issues in higher education specifically, but certainly that within higher education, I'm sure we're all seeing a big uptick in academic unfair means, no really good potential to be able to detect misuse of AI. And not only that, if we are to embrace AI, the whole argument is, you know, if this is our future, we need to teach our students how to use these tools. But there's a huge unknown out there surrounding the development of expertise and what students are actually learning as they go from novices to more knowledgeable when they do start to rely on generative AI tools. An interesting study that's just come out in 2024 looked at this question, and they examined between students who used AI assistants versus didn't, as well as those that used it and then stopped using it to kind of tell the differences about what students were actually learning. And the results of that experiment suggested that students tended to rely on rather than learn from AI assistants. And if AI assistance was removed, the self-regulated learning strategies that they were using to help support student learning could fill the gap, but were not as effective as AI assistants. So they still tended to produce better results using the tools. Results also showed that hybrid human AI approaches that complement AI assistance with self-regulated strategies were not more effective than AI assistance on its own. So they concluded essentially that, you know, we need to grapple with some of these issues around what does it mean to have agency in this world? What does it mean to work collaboratively with AI? What do students need to know for their job or to get a degree, for example? So given all these various issues and developments, a number of my colleagues and I at King's College London were discussing really just about this tension about, you know, given there are so many issues from an ethical standpoint surrounding the way these tools have been developed and deployed, especially in our institutional environment, without so much as even a discussion with us. You know, you open your Teams or your Microsoft 365 one day and Copilot is already just there, and now you Google things and it's already just there. So it's really being embedded into all of our everyday tools, and it's becoming less and less easy to critically reflect on what the impact of these tools on our lives and society actually is. So we developed a framework for responsible AI education, which really puts at the center these questions around social justice and equity. It means that any time that we want to learn about AI or with AI, we think that it's important to contextualize AI. Where does it come from? What are we using it for? Why are we using it? And in that, we encourage a process of reflection and action, particularly on yourself as an educator, on your learners, and in the wider context. And then, of course, a key element of really learning about all of these issues, or learning to question the impacts of AI on our lives and society to be able to make responsible choices. We landed on really a critical pedagogy approach, focusing on dialogue and participation, but also teaching students how to ask critical questions. And I think I have just a couple more minutes. Stop me if I don't. But so when we developed that framework, it was, it's a pie in the sky kind of framework. And I came together with more and other colleagues at King's College London, and we started to consider what it would really mean to implement this kind of framework in a higher education context. And what we ended up developing was to take the focus away from AI and to recenter the educational discussion around AI on the promotion of social equity and environmental justice. So we instead, we focused our initiative on education for sustainable development. And we wanted to try and integrate AI in an educational for sustainable development theme so that students could learn about AI and learn to develop critical question asking abilities in that context, to be able to reflect on some of these issues before or during they start to use some of these tools in their own practices. So we explored AI and extreme heat from a number of different areas, and we organized sort of multidisciplinary workshops where students were investigating these themes, learning how to use generative AI, and then reflecting and discussing about what they found. And in general, the workshops were very fun. We had a really good time. I think a lot of the students valued most actually the cross-disciplinary discussion. So we had, students from all different subject areas across many different faculties. And at the same time, in exploring some of these extreme heat themes, and especially doing things like generating images, the students were really quite, it was quick that the students could identify some of the biases in the images or the information that they were gathering. And especially when they started to question from learning from across the different disciplinary perspectives or geographical perspectives, students could really kind of pick it up really fast, some of the limitations of these tools. And I do want to point this out again, because I think, especially with essays and when students don't really know the subject area well, they'll just generate something and they won't be able to critically evaluate it. So doing an activity like this first, where they can see the limitations for themselves and really kind of reflect on them, and the energy costs of generating a silly image that is not even very useful, they start to be a bit more cautious. So it's easier for them to do something like this and really take a good lesson away, rather than I'd say being told that you need to critically evaluate your sources. Goes in one ear and out the other. And it's fun to kind of generate images and see how ridiculous they are. But I'm going over my time now, so I will stop there. I could go on for hours and hours, but hopefully we can have more good discussions in the question and answers.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Caitlin. That was extremely engaging. Has anybody got a question for Caitlin? Otherwise, I'll use my chair's prerogative and ask one myself, but I'll let the audience. No? Okay. So you said something that really stuck with me, which is basically AI is becoming embedded in our lives. I mean, even if you hate AI, you can't run away from it because it's everywhere. It's in the internet, it's on your phone, it's on the search pages, and it's becoming more and more embedded. And basically what made me think immediately was, how can we ensure students maintain that critical sense when they read information in the coming months, when they see immediately, an analysis, a statement to that question? How do we ensure they actually question that information and keep being critical about it? Not just, I mean, do we have to teach them how to do it, as you suggest, or basically, how do we do it?
Yeah, I think further on in my slides as well, I wanted to get to the point where I said I'm really hoping that what you can take away from my talk today is that it's everyone's responsibility to have discussions across different subject areas about the impact of these tools on our lives and society. And the reason for having discussions like that is not just to raise awareness or to teach students critical like evaluation skills, but it has this dimension of activism around it, and the need for all of the citizen base to really stand up for their rights, because a lot of people are going to be at risk in the future, whether it's because of climate change or job displacement. And it may not be our privileged students, but we really want our privileged students to do something about it to make the world a better place. And I think, while it's not directly answering your message, I think we really need to motivate students in that way, because if we give students a meaning to their life and something to stand up for, and a way to claim some of their rights and responsibilities, I think it can be really motivating, if maybe not for everyone. If I can reach like a small portion of those students to become a bit more active in tackling some of these complex issues, I feel like that's a job well done on my part. But I did want to say, I think across all areas, even if you don't feel like it's your duty to teach your students about AI, specifically, we need to have conversations about this regularly. So I often recommend just taking 5 minutes out of your class to ask them how they're using it, whether they're feeling comfortable about it, what are the impacts on people in other places of the world, or going through some of these impacts from your disciplinary perspectives. And I'll stop there.
No, that's very good. Very good answer. Shall we move to the next speaker, and we'll collect the questions from other colleagues to the Q&A at the end, hopefully. So thank you very much, Caitlin. We're going to move on to Stephen. I'm not sure Stephen has got the right, he's not a co-host anymore for some reason. So maybe, Ashley, could you give Stephen the ability to share his screen? Yes. So Stephen, can you hear us? I think you can share your screen. So whenever you're ready, you're very welcome to take.
Thank you, Carlos. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the ethical considerations of AI when we're thinking about research and economics education. And largely, I'm going to be coming at this from three separate approaches. The first is thinking about how we use AI and how AI is being used within the research process. Secondly, in terms of AI in the use of writing papers, and finally, AI in the use of reviewing and editing papers. So there are different ethical and potentially legal considerations in each of those cases. So let's start with the AI in the research process. So in economics education, I'm aware of research that's been going on in a number of areas. The first paper that I came across in economics education focusing on AI was actually looking at ChatGPT and its ability to solve the TUS in America, and even with ChatGPT 3 being able to gain very high marks on those multiple choice tests. But this raises an area of research that people are interested in how students might use ChatGPT either to cheat, or how good ChatGPT is at answering questions and replicating human input. Now, I'm not going to talk much yet about my particular views about the ethics of some of these, but I'll talk a little bit about each of these, and then I'll come back and talk about them in a bit more detail. So I'm aware of people being interested in the use of AI as a substitute for academic input, so using AI to mark students' work and to evaluate how well it marks those students' work. Experiments within the classroom and experiments within teaching, thinking about how AI is being used, how it could be used to enhance the educational process, how it can be used to enhance students' learning, maybe partially as a complement towards lecturers. Similarly, evaluating the students' use of AI within the classroom. Building on some of the things that Caitlin already has spoken about, thinking about how you leverage AI in terms of creating authentic assessments and producing additional support for students. Now, as I say, there's a lot of consideration that we need to take when we're thinking about AI and ethical use of AI within academic research. I'm not going to pretend that I have all of the answers, but I will hopefully be able to provoke a lot of questions. Now, the first thing that I always think is really important is asking yourself whether or not there are any legal complications to a research question. So, for instance, if we're trying to evaluate the student's ability to cheat or enhance their work in a way that might not be what we intend, or alternatively, even using AI to mark students' work, there may be potential legal issues, there may be ethical issues. So one of the things that we really have to be conscious of when we're thinking about research questions using AI is what personal data, what data that is produced by any human are we uploading into AI to be analyzed by a remote system. This is an immediate problem if we're thinking about trying to evaluate it in marking students' work, for instance. That will almost certainly involve the upload of material to a third-party computer, potentially breaching students' personal data. Similarly, if there's any research outcomes that you're looking at using human participants, is there anything that AI is doing which is going to end up analyzing those human participants' data and potentially breaching GDPR? So this raises a number of important questions. I'm aware that some research is being done using AI to leverage the actual research and analysis of the data. And again, the question is always, are we doing everything to ensure that anonymity is met? Are we ensuring that we've got informed consent? This could also be if we are trying to evaluate how good ChatGPT is. We might be tempted to carry out research which effectively, an example of a research question that I've seen has been to submit a question to ChatGPT and then submit this to human markers to try and evaluate how well ChatGPT is at hiding itself. Of course, this raises ethical concerns about whether or not the markers who are being effectively tested are able to give informed consent. Within the education realm as well, we have to be slightly careful in terms of delivering or engaging in experimental research on students, particularly if it's related to their learning process. We know that ChatGPT doesn't get everything right. We know that artificial intelligence and large language models, they can mimic the ability to have good conversation, but they will make errors, they will hallucinate ideas, they will hallucinate references. So there is a question that this raises of what we do if we are carrying out research, experimenting with AI within the classroom, if the AI starts to create hallucinating or hallucinated ideas. Similarly, it's very important if we are carrying out any research within artificial intelligence and how it might be included in the classroom, to think about any biases that the AI might introduce. Because of the way that the AI is trained, there are inherent biases, and we need to think about how those might impact on the student's learning journey. Now, these are the sorts of questions that we might be asking in research, but I'm also interested in my role as an editor of IRI about the role that AI might play in terms of producing content. So one area that AI has been used quite significantly has been in actually being leveraged to write or rewrite articles. There are some very prolific authors, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes, who have actually made a very large number of papers where they have simply leveraged artificial intelligence, in particular ChatGPT, to write journal articles in a semi-critical manner. Now, linked to that, there's a question, well, is it ethically okay for AI to produce content? Is it okay for AI to help with the interpretation of content? If we're faced with carrying out a literature review and we find that there's elements of papers that we don't understand, is it ethically okay for us to think about using AI to try and help us understand or to interpret that literature, or to help us understand or interpret results? In the writing of analysis, AI could be used to analyze data, but again, there's the ethical and the legal questions about whether or not this is strictly legal, whether or not you're going to end up breaching data protection regulations. Similarly, you might have AI and you might ask the AI to provide you with feedback on your writing. Now, from my perspective, if you are using AI to provide feedback, or you're using AI to help improve readability, this is very different to using AI to produce content. The question is always, well, what is the general difference between using AI to help you improve the readability and sharing an article with a colleague or with people in seminars to ask for feedback and comments? But this does raise the question of how you appropriately attribute AI. In academic setting, certainly in the education setting, we have some very strong rules at the University of Bristol, such that if AI is prohibited, students aren't allowed to use any sort of AI tool, including translation software, including Grammarly, to try and improve readability. And in the research realm, the rules are similar, but not quite always the same. So I'm just going to move on to talk a little bit about some authors who have been very prolific. There has been a large number of articles, particularly produced by some bizwas. Some of these papers will be very famous, where the author effectively leveraged ChatGPT. And if in the introduction to many of these articles, the author made the statement, as the human author of this article, I would like to say that the majority of this article was written by ChatGPT, unless otherwise indicated. The headings and subheadings were used as input in its user interface. So this raises a question of how much can ChatGPT be involved if it's generating its own ideas. This is a particular case where the author saw a gap in the literature and tried to illustrate and tried to provide some critical evaluation of the way that ChatGPT was seeing the future of a range of areas. Now, a lot of journals, a lot of publishers have already created policies which can help shape our understanding of the ethics relating to artificial intelligence. IRI is published by Elsevier, and Elsevier's policies I've tried to summarize here. If you want to access them, the QR code will take you straight to the full version of the Elsevier policies. But in general, the policies are quite strict. AI should only be used to improve the readability of authors' work. Authors are ultimately responsible for the content of their work. So effectively, in Elsevier's position, it's the case that the authors are responsible for the content, that AI shouldn't be used to generate content. And if they do use AI to try and improve the readability, they need to disclose how they've used it. It is important in terms of the authorship of a paper that the author is a human author, because ultimately that human author is responsible for the content and potentially the retraction of any paper. So because of that, AI authors cannot be listed as an author or as a co-author. Further on that, Elsevier has a policy that AI should not be used to create or alter images. So for instance, you should not be using AI to improve the readability of a graph, for instance, if you're submitting it to a journal. And the reason for this is in part to try and ensure that we aren't manipulating the data, we aren't manipulating the output that we are seeing to make it look better. The one exception to this is if AI is being used as part of the research process. So if you're using AI within the research process, then it could be the case that generative AI could be used to create images. Now, the third element, which I wanted to touch upon, and in part this is because we have seen evidence that this may be taking place a little bit, is that manuscripts should really not ever be in the peer review process uploaded to AI. Again, this comes down to some of the legal elements and the data protection elements, in that by uploading the manuscript to an LLM, for instance, we could end up sharing data that is not permitted to be sold, to be shared. But more importantly, we might be sharing intellectual property, which is still the property of the author at that time. More importantly, we want, when we send out articles for review, to have the human element, the human expert, to be able to provide a critical evaluation of that literature, of that paper, built in their own knowledge of the literature in the area. Now, my final element, and this is just something that has been raised as a question. Does it actually matter about how much we use AI within the research process? As long as the LLM is not engaging in bias, as long as it's expanding the frontier of human knowledge, does it really matter? And I'm not going to say that I think it does matter or it doesn't matter, but I think that's a really important question to finish with.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That's very thought-provoking. I'm hoping that we'll have lots of questions later on. Again, I'll open the floor to questions. I don't want to be a monopoly, but I do have a question if nobody does. But I think, was it Jana has a question? How do we come to a consensus as a community to you, the final question on your slides? I think she wants to put you in the spot and actually hear what your opinion is.
Sorry.
No, so I think it's a really important question. And ultimately, as we currently are, we know that LLMs have biases inherently brought into them in their training. So it is almost certainly the case that if we leveraged large language models, or if we leveraged AI to try and carry out research, we'd end up introducing a whole set of biases into that research. Now, that's not to say that humans are inherently unbiased. We are inherently flawed, but at least with the human element, we're able to critically evaluate, and we're able to engage with others to critically evaluate our work. My position at the minute is that if I saw an article written by artificial intelligence, I would not be happy accepting it to a journal.
Thank you very much. And a little kind of related, but a question from me, if I'm allowed to use my chair prerogative again. You know, the ethical rules are a bit more flexible in the US. Let's say flexible. Let's not say anything else. It's much easier to get research ethics approval in the US than it is in UK and Europe. Will that possibly make European academics, penalize their research because they're not allowed to do the same kind of things that our US colleagues can make?
So this is something that this is not a new question. This is not a question that's just come up due to AI. This has been an eternal question as long as I've been engaged in pedagogical research and engaging with literature. We see a lot more experimental design within the US, and actually some of the other journals in economics education strongly encourage the use of experiments, which IRE is less encouraging of, simply because we are aware of the ethical difficulties it might be to get pure experiments through. Now, it's not the case that experiments are purely forbidden in the UK. Particularly in education, we've seen, certainly in the higher education realm, we should probably be looking at what is going on in research and education, in high school education. There are a range of colleagues across high school education who are able to carry out a range of experiments and experimental designs, provided there aren't priors that one intervention is going to be better than another. I have a colleague at Bristol who is working heavily in that area and has designed some really useful protocols to carry out these sort of research. And again, the key thing in the ethical approval always has to be that we don't have a prior, and that we can carry out the research without damaging or intentionally damaging one group compared to another.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I can see the questions coming up on the chat, but we're going to save those for the Q&A session at the end. I will make sure we will get to it. I will move on to Edwin as our last speaker of the day. And yeah, I think you can share the screen and start whenever you're ready, Edwin.
Excellent. Let's do that. Excellent. Hi, everyone. So my name is Edwin, and I do work a lot on AI and hiring. And in particular, I do a lot of studies on basically how applicants respond to the use of human versus AI, as well as how one should debias hiring algorithms and so forth. So I've got quite a bit of work on those things. But today I just thought I'll talk about something a little bit more specific research with some of my colleagues, just because it is very relevant to a lot of us at the moment, which is something called automated interviews. So there you go. So basically, the hiring landscape has been transformed by new disruptive technology. So, for example, many of you would know that employers have started using AI to screen CVs. And also, many of our students now will go through these automated interviews used to screen applicants. So, so when they apply for grad job, quite often they just get sent straight onto these automated interviews as an early part of the recruitment process. But this is not just for grad jobs, but also for jobs across the board. Even there's recently, I think, a hairdressing company that used automated interviews to decide who to fire, for example. It's absolutely crazy. And then these can often be evaluated by human and AI as well. So traditionally, screening phone calls are a rare additional stage of the application process, and it's generally quite exclusive to larger resourceful employers. But now with the availability of technology, it means that basically all sorts of employers can quite easily, cheaply just send all the applicants onto these automated interviews. And they are also quite often can be evaluated by AI to cut costs as well. So this is, of course, no doubt very controversial. But having said that, according to the Harvard Business Review, 86% of the employers that they survey basically automate these initial stage interviews. So we're talking about something that's pretty much gone from 0 to 86% in just the last couple of years. Is quite dramatic. So what are these automated interviews for those of you who might not be familiar? So that's kind of how it works. So you get asked these kind of very typical interview questions, like please describe how your skills, education, experience will help you succeed in this position. And then basically you normally get like a minute to practice, and then you'll record yourself giving an answer to this question. And then basically you just move on to the next question. So people would argue that, it will help employers extract more objective information on applicants before making decisions, because basically every single applicant will be asked the same question in the exact same way. So there's technically less preferential treatment. You don't have different interview question depending on, say, what the candidates might look like. But of course, there comes with a lot of costs. And that includes to the applicants. So, for example, the applicants, it's a lot of extra efforts, time, and stress for the applicants who have to do this for so many jobs. And there are, of course, serious potential discrimination concerns, as well as we've heard earlier that, the data that the AI trained on, for example, could be biased, and also it might signal negative perceptions of the company, because it almost sounds like this company can't be bothered to interview me and just got a robot to do that. So but yeah, this discrimination concern is of course quite important, because multiple very big providers of these automated interviews are basically getting sued, especially in the US, for discrimination. So, this is quite a hot topic, but it's really come up in the last 3 to 5 years, but now it's really, really commonplace. So what's our research question in this project? We basically conduct a natural field experiment, so almost like an RCT, using one of the major automated interview platforms in the world to basically provide a very comprehensive causal study on the impact of this new technology on a range of things. So this includes applicant behaviors, all right? So for example, are applicants deterred by automated interviews? Does it matter whether or not they will be evaluated by humans or by AI? And who gets deterred? Does it differ by gender, by ability, or by the profession that they're in? And then we also look at shortlisting outcome when we use human or AI to make evaluations on these interviews. So, for example, the difference in interview performance evaluations between AI and human evaluators, and also what would the final shortlist look like, for example, in terms of gender composition. So these are all the kind of questions that we're trying to ask. So let me show you what we actually did in our study. So we advertised for three real jobs in tech in the US across major job boards. And these are real jobs. We hire people, we pay them and so forth, and they do work for us. So we're hiring one programmer, one web designer, one content creator. As you can see, the gender composition of each job will be quite different. So programmer is roughly 80% men. Web designer is more 50-50, whereas content creator, we're talking slightly more women, or more like 40% men. And in total, we had over 3,000 applicants submitting their resume or CVs, filling an application form that also detailed their demographics, education, skills, and work experience. And then what we did is then we randomized the applicants into different interview treatments. So all qualified applicants, just like any company would, are randomized into, are invited to an interview. And this includes automated interviews that is done by video, so like the one I showed you before. And they will be told that it's evaluated by AI, which is quite common practice. So a lot of interview platform does tell you actually whether you will be evaluated by AI or by human. Video interview evaluated by human, but also we offer audio interviews. So this is they can be randomized into doing just the recording of their voice without the video, and once again evaluated by AI or humans. And then we also have live Zoom interviews. So we actually get the applicants to schedule in the time to have a Zoom interview with us. And then finally, we have a control treatment where basically the applicants, they just have to click a button to say that they're still interested in the position to basically continue to be considered. So we know naturally how many people will basically still be technically in the pool, how many would normally drop out. After that, we then have the resumes evaluated by AI. And also, we also evaluated all completed interviews by real AI algorithms, but also by professional human evaluators. So we basically got thousands of interviews evaluated. And then as part of the study, we also shortlisted and hired the people that we said we would hire. So that's kind of just experimental design. We advertise for a job, people apply, we randomize into different interview treatments, and now let's look at what happened as we also evaluate them. So for the automated interviews, we are given access to one of the world's most important automated interview platforms. It's used by more than half of Fortune 100 companies, and also it's hosted more than 17 million virtual interviews. And they also have an inventory of interview questions based on the job that's advertised. So for programmer, they have different questions to say for web designer, with each question covering key competency for the job. So we've got these out-of-the-box questions. And the applicants, this is all platform standard. So they have 1 minute to practice each question before recording an answer, which is up to 2 minutes each. And in our live Zoom treatment, we basically have a research assistant to ask the exact same question, read out the exact same way to them, so that, it's all consistent. So they are all asked the same questions. So that's how it works. And in terms of the evaluation interview, the AI evaluation is provided by the platform. And because they got sued many times in the past, they no longer use facial recognition or tonal recognition, none of that. They transcribed all the interviews into words only, and then evaluate the words. And then they basically score them based on a set of 5 competencies. So the overall score range will be between 0 and 5. Okay. And then for human evaluation, so the platform, by the way, like I said, this AI algorithm, is provided by the platform, but it's also responsible for basically evaluating millions and millions of job candidates in the world. So it is quite very significant, I suppose, algorithm that's being used here. For human evaluation, we hired a Chicago-based global recruitment company. It's one of the largest recruitment companies. We have 4 experienced HR recruiters with specific expertise in tech, because we're in the tech industry here, evaluating all the interviews. So they use everything as provided by the platform. So they also evaluate all 5 competencies and an overall score. And also each candidate is evaluated by 1 recruiter, except for 100 candidates for consistency. Well, we're trying to check the consistency. We got them evaluated by all 4 recruiters, and as you can see, the scores are actually highly correlated, so the recruiters are very consistent with each other. So that's how the evaluation works. And in addition, just like all your students, we also have the resume, so the CVs evaluated by an algorithm. So regardless of whether they completed the additional interviews or not, we had a screening software to basically score each resume. So the provider is another major provider that's used by companies around the world. And what they do is that they parse the resume, so they extract all the words in the resume, and they match the resume with the job description, and basically rate the applicants on a scale of 0 to 100. So they will specifically look for, what kind of degree this applicant has, and so forth. And this basically allows us to study who's selected into completing an interview based on the quality and the fit of the applicants. Okay, so we've got plenty of evaluation, and all, very, carefully done. So now let's talk a little bit about what we actually see in the results. So basically, these applicants, they have to go through to do these interviews. So as I mentioned, there's a control treatment where the applicants, all they have to do is to just click they're still interested in the job to proceed. So we know what the natural dropout rate is when it comes to applicants, no longer considering the job. So in the control treatment, you can see roughly 85% of the people continued. Okay. Now let's see what happened if you send them to one of these automated interviews. Basically, you lost more than half your applicants. So more than half of your applicants basically dropped out and did not complete the process. And now you might ask, what happened if we send them to a Zoom interview instead? And remember, a Zoom interview is actually more work, because you have to find a time and all that. And actually, we only lost relatively few applicants. So almost 70% of the applicants completed the Zoom interview. So basically, the first observation we have is that the completion rates are much, much higher for the live Zoom interview than it is for the automated interviews. Okay. Now, what about all the different automated interviews that we tested? Are there any difference between them? Not dramatically, as you can see. So they are all fairly similar to each other, with there being a very slight preference for audio interview over video interview. Okay. But generally speaking, basically any type of automated interview, you are losing half your applicants or more. Okay. When you send them to do these things. And then what about by gender? Is there a gender difference in how many complete the automated interviews? So you can see that in the control group, there's not a gender difference in the dropout rate. So, roughly the same number of people continue. In the Zoom treatment, there are slightly more men complete, but also you can see that in the asynchronous interviews, more women drop out as well. And by proportion, that is fairly sizable. So while there's no gender difference in people indicate their continued interest in the position, men are more likely to complete the automated interview than women. Okay, so 5 percentage points more. So you might ask, okay, a lot of people drop off, but maybe we are just kicking out people who are less qualified anyway, right? Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we'll have fewer candidates to evaluate. But is that the case? So once again, we've got the CV score. And what we see is that compared to the control, as you can see, during these interviews, does not actually lead you to having more qualified applicants staying in the process. So it does not select out, say, the less qualified candidates, okay? So the user interview does not deter less qualified candidates compared to the control, as evaluated by basically the AI CV score, which look at your experience, education as a fit. So it gives you a rough idea about your qualification. So it does not lead to a higher ability candidate. So you're not just kicking out, you're kicking good candidates out as well. Now, as we said, we advertise for 3 different kind of jobs. Do we see differences across the different jobs? Not really. So for the most part, the dropout rate is still huge, whether we are hiring for a programmer, web designer, or content creator, with maybe a slight exception that female web designers are just slightly more likely to complete the asynchronous interview. But generally speaking, the main result is still there. You know, this is across all jobs that, you know, you are losing a lot of candidates. And then we also did some post-interview questions, so a survey for those who completed. And of course, for those people who completed the interview, any treatment difference would be more limited because the fact that they completed it meant they were more okay with it. But still, will we see any difference? Yes. So applicants in the human treatments, so in the treatments where they know that they will be evaluated by humans, they do report a higher fairness. They think it's fairer than those who completed the AI treatments. There's actually no treatment differences in reported barriers and anxiety, whether they were evaluated by human, AI, or doing a video versus audio interview. But what we do see is that the NPS, which is Net Promoter Score, for the employer is much lower for AI interviews compared to human interviews. So those who completed an AI interview or an interview to be evaluated by AI gave a much lower satisfaction score, so 0.5 in NPS in management. It is very, very significant. So people are less happy with the process when you use AI. So that might basically make people perceive your company a lot less positively. And then when we ask people to just rate all evaluators, Zoom interviews considered the fairest, followed by human interviews, followed by AI evaluator interviews, which you can see the fairness rating here is very, very low. So basically, people have a strong preference for Zoom interview, followed by an automated interview, whereas in terms of video versus audio, it doesn't really matter. And there's no gender differences whatsoever for these questions. So just a takeaway on the applicant side, what we see is that the use of automated interviews deter applicants more so for women than for men. And so we basically have a trade-off in terms of obtaining information for employers, but also deterring people, and also the cost and procedural fairness. So you can see that the Zoom interview is considered the fairest, followed by any human evaluator interview. But of course, the live Zoom interview will have the highest cost because you need the manpower, but also the scheduling problem. And human evaluators are also quite costly, whereas AI evaluators are quite low. But in terms of deterrence, you get very low deterrence with a live Zoom interview, whereas a much higher deterrence for all the other ones, okay? So that's a summary there. And very quickly, I'll just let you know what we find on the evaluation side. So on the employer side of things. So as I mentioned earlier, we use AI to evaluate all the CVs. And what you see here is that basically there's very little gender differences in CV scores in general. So so it's not like, you know, men are more qualified than women or vice versa in any of these jobs dramatically, okay? But what's interesting to see is, you know, how AI and human evaluate all the interviews. So this is what we see here. So for the AI scores, so the top table is the AI score, and I want you to focus on asynchronous interviews, is that they tend to score women higher than men, okay? Whereas in the Zoom interview, it's a little bit hard using AI, as you can imagine, because, you know, we have to send them the recordings on Zoom, which is a little bit less perfect. But in the asynchronous interview, you can see that basically the AI score women better. Whereas for the human recruiters, what we do see is that they tend to score men slightly better than for women. for the exact same set of interviews. Okay, so we evaluated all 2,500 interviews, but of course, for selection, when we actually hire people, we will do according to the treatments. And then you might also ask, how correlated are these human and AI evaluation of the interview? And the answer is they are extremely correlated with each other. So in most cases, they will screen out the bottom candidates, and basically, when it comes to the very best candidates, AI and human actually agree with each other a lot. Okay. So basically, there's not much difference between the two, perhaps, other than the fact that human are kind of I guess they judge women worse, whereas AI judge women better. And then when we look at the top 25% of the applicants, so these are kind of like the shortlisting parts. At best, the top 25% of the applicants in the real world will be shortlisted for the next round. So we focus on the top 25% of candidates as selected by the AI versus the top 25% of the candidates as selected by human. How do they differ? So I want you to focus just on the left panel here. But basically what you find is that the human evaluator selects a lot more men than women, so 63% men compared to 47% men as selected by AI in the top 25%. And also AI selects more underrepresented minorities in terms of ethnicity as well. So basically you do get quite a difference in terms of the outcomes of the evaluation. And remember, with AI, they actually can't tell the gender because it's all transcribed. There's no, like I said, facial or tone recognition there. So in this kind of a representative case study, these are the takeaways. So the AI algorithm that we use will play a role in possibly millions of hiring decisions worldwide. And what we find is that the AI score women higher on average in the asynchronous interviews, whereas our professional recruiters do play a role in hiring decisions worldwide as well, and the evaluations are quite consistent with each other. And what we do find is that they tend to score men higher than women. Okay. In terms of shortlisting, we find that human recruiters recruit more men than AI, and they select more Asians, but fewer other underrepresented minorities than AI. By the way, Asians not an underrepresented minority in the tech industry. That's why they're not part of underrepresented minority there. So just to sum up what I've said in this latest research that I have, we studied the impact of different automated screening tools on hiring outcomes. So while these automated screening tools are now the norm, there's really little evidence on how it impacts hiring outcomes. And in our supply-side natural field experiments, we find that basically it significantly deter applicants, and female applicants are more likely to be deterred than male applicants. And of course, the interviews do not actually deter weaker applicants either. Whereas on the evaluation side, what we do see is that professional human evaluators are more likely to choose men and less likely to choose underrepresented minorities compared to a very widely used AI hiring algorithm. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.
Okay, Edwin, thank you very much. That's another very thought-provoking talk, and as we can see from all the questions coming up in the chat. Again, I will just open maybe just to one question if anybody has, and then we'll open the floor to, well, we'll try and go through these questions for the three candidates. So does anybody want to raise their hand to ask a question to Edwin? No? So I think one of the questions in the chat, which might be, I'm going to be paraphrasing and summarizing, is that humans appear to be actually more biased than the AI, which is something that we normally don't think is the case. Think maybe that the AIs are ever, a basic bias already. But actually, if you are from a minority group or female, you should actually prefer AI. Is that the right interpretation?
Well, there are a couple of things. So first of all, I guess AI algorithms have evolve a lot. As I mentioned, I do work a little bit on debiasing AI hiring algorithms. And the last 5 years, basically, I think a lot of algorithms have improved to try and reduce any bias they might have, both in the training data, but also there are different fairness criteria that they try to satisfy. So that can only help. And as you can see, they really need to do that because of all the lawsuits that you've seen. Now, the other thing that I would say is basically, according to other research as well, similar kind of research here, is that we do find evidence that actually women sometimes actually prefer AI to human evaluators. And in particular, in one study, one other study that I had, we had a very small sample of non-binary candidates. In fact, those people have extremely strong preference to be evaluated by AI. So, so basically, it's complicated. So basically, humans are also biased, you know, just innately, biologically, unfortunately, you know, we have our biases and there are evolutionary reasons for that. Whereas machines can often be biased, but arguably fixing machine bias can sometimes be easier than fixing human bias because you can just program it in and it will do it. So, so technology is evolving all the time. And of course, you know, these days, most AI algorithms in the hiring space will have some form of debiasing in place. So that answers the question.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm going to open now the room to questions from all three candidates. You can raise your hand like Banali has just done, or you can continue to post your questions on the chat, and I'm going to try and keep an eye on both. So Banali, if I'm saying the name correctly.
Yes, thank you very much. I just have a very basic question that I'm very curious to know that why people are dropped off with the AI interview, first of all. Why are they dropped off more compared to the human one? And why Zoom interview is fairer than the human interview? Is there any explanation for that?
Well, thank you for your question. So I guess it is quite hard to find causal reasons why this is the case. So we only really have more, I suppose, anecdotal reasons. So, for example, I do have students who got one of these automated interview from BlackRock, an investment banking firm, and he just basically told me that he's not doing it just because he doesn't feel valued. So basically he just turned it down. So I mean, that's anecdotal, but it's a story that I've heard over and over again. So, you know, these interviews might signal something along the line of, you know, the company doesn't care enough about, you know, me to bother interviewing me using a real human. So that could be why, because as we saw with the Zoom treatments, we do get quite a high completion rate when it's actually a lot more work to do a Zoom interview than this automated interview that you can do any time of the day you want. You don't have to tidy up nicely and all that. So yeah, it's really hard to say exactly why, but that will be the kind of follow-up questions that we'd be interested in knowing. But just as a first thing we do is just to find out, you know, what are we looking at in the first place. But yes, we were a little bit surprised by how big the drop-off is. But it is something that I think employers would probably want to know because there's just no causal evidence on this before this. So thanks.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you.
thank you very much for your question. We've got Ashley next. Ashley, do you have a question or you just want to make a...
Oh, sorry, that must be my speaker not working. I was just going to summarize a couple of questions that were in the chat, which is that people asked Edwin whether you knew anything about the candidate's age or their socioeconomic background and whether that made a difference to their preferences on the interviews.
Thanks for the question. So socioeconomic background is a little bit difficult to know. Whereas age, I've looked at it casually before, but not formally. But I don't remember seeing any big differences. But that's something that, yes, we will probably look at a little bit more formally, analyze it a little bit more formally. But yes, thanks for the question. Yeah, so I don't think there's a huge difference, and there's also not a big difference across jobs as well, because you can tell some jobs are more techy than others. So, programmer job, people are more familiar with tech versus maybe content creator a little bit less so. But we don't see much difference between those jobs either.
And was there another question, Ashley, or?
No, that was just me summarizing a couple of things that are on the chat.
Okay, I think that there is another thread in the chat, basically asking whether the AI could guess the gender of the candidates by looking at the CVs, just because of the activities that each gender prefer. They might do different things. So, even if the name is removed, can the AI kind of infer what the gender is?
So if anything, so the AI doesn't have access to the CV, by the way. They only have access to the transcribed interview. So they only have access to the words in the interview. And from that, it's not always easy to really guess the gender. I mean, so they don't have access to the tones, to the voice, to facial recognition, none of that. It's just words. So, but that's kind of not how AI would work in this case either, trying to guess whether or not someone's a man or a woman based on the way they say things. But I don't think they do those kind of corrections personally. But of course, it is a little bit of a black box.
Okay.
But they don't have access to names or CVs or anything like that, so they can't infer that easily.
Thank you. If I may, I'll ask a question to Caitlin, if I can. Caitlin, you explained that King's has a 2 weeks course in FutureLearn, which is something that your students are asked to complete. What has been your experience? I mean, have students engaged with the course? Have they enjoyed it? They find it useful?
So I think right now there's like, we can see that there are thousands of people who have enrolled, and we've gotten lots of very useful feedback. We also know that people worldwide are kind of organizing parties to, more like time to do it within their teams, and they've all given us good feedback about that as well. Whether my own colleagues are using it, I'm in a computer science department, so I would probably say that most of my colleagues have not bothered, but in other areas where there's less technical understanding of what these tools imply, I've gotten lots of good comments about it. At the same time, it's it's just a starting point, and there's a bit of a conflict between the approach that I'm advocating for, in which we're learning through discussion, through reflection and action. And so this 2-week course is really just an introduction to get people on the same page. But I would definitely say that more experimentation, taking what we know about adult learning theory, which is really like thinking about your own practice, and tinkering with things or trying something out and reflecting on it seems to work quite well for adults.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Caitlin. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to again use my chair prerogative and take over the floor. And I've got a question for Stephen. You quite provocatively said that areas of interesting research might be whether we should use AI to mark students' work, to improve on feedback, and so on and so forth. Do you know of how students feel about this? I mean, similar to the work of of Edwin about asking if they know they've been assessed by an AI, will students like this, or will they just say, well, I pay £9,500 a year and a machine it's assessing me? Do you foresee any problems there?
I mean, ultimately, any use of AI runs the risk, however we're using it, of students complaining that they are paying significant tuition fees, and that they don't want to pay for an AI to do the work, particularly as they might perceive that there's more bias. Now, using tools like ChatGPT, I think, is really problematic at the minute, simply because that would involve uploading student work, student intellectual property into a third-party piece of software. So from my point of view, there is a potential legal or ethical problem before we even get there. If we are to make the case to students that we're going to experiment or even start using artificial intelligence in the marking process, there needs to be some sort of quid pro quo as well. In that, I mean, there is some evidence that AI might be more consistent in its marking. That might be a way of selling it towards students, but also if it frees up academics' time to be able to provide more time in supporting the students in their development, then that might be another way of selling it. But we are in very early days to be able to say that actually this is going to be something that's potentially flyable in any way.
Well, thanks very much. We very quickly coming to the end of this talk. We've got one question from Erwin, which I think it's quite important. Could we, should we use AI interviews for selective university programs in light of the budget cuts in HE? I suspect you're thinking about Oxbridge and other universities that have interviews for both undergraduate and postgraduate students. And I would actually extend it. Should we do this for academics, hiring academics?
Well, I suppose that we're economists here, and that kind of depends on the market, isn't it? If you are the monopoly, then you can do whatever you want. But but if you're competing with other universities for, say, the best applicants, then that could be a little bit tricky. As you can see, when you send people to automated interviews, they don't seem to be happy about it. That's why so few of them completed it. And then also using AI to make evaluation also make people give people a very negative perception of the employer, or in this case, the university. So it probably doesn't do you great at this moment in time to use kind of AI evaluated automated interviews, and you might end up basically losing to competitors who don't. So there's a bit of game theory here, depends on what everyone else does. But as it stands, yes, it probably won't be good. But once again, if you're the monopoly, you're the only good university that, you know, no matter what everyone wants to get into, then that's a very different story.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I don't see any more hands up or questions in the chat. So I'm just going to thank once again all the speakers. It's been a fantastic session. I think a lot of thought-provoking ideas. I also want to thank Ashley and Martin from the Economics Network to provide us support for this session. And you know that this session has been recorded, so you can access the recording on the Economics Network website, as you can find out a lot of other information that is relevant to all of us. So thanks again, everyone, and see you next time. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.